I said I had no time to read in October, but still somehow I read like 15 books. Welcome to another video, everyone. Hope you're all well. If you're new here, my name is Nikita, and on this channel we prioritize BIPOC stories, especially South Asian stories, both in fiction and in real life. So you can expect a lot of book chats, book recommendations, and my podcast called Brown People Problems. So let's chat about the 14 books I read in the month of October, despite saying that I didn't have time to read. I know. But before we get started, let me know how you're enjoying this new setup. I have a bit of a new setup here in terms of camera. And let me know if that's something that you like. So the very first book that I read in the month of October was Murder Under a Red Moon by Harini Nagendra. This is a book I have talked a lot about, and I did a whole reading vlog reading this book, so I will certainly link it up here and down below as well. So I'm not going to go too much into this book, but if you want a more detailed analysis and like a more detailed conversation about it, check out that vlog. But basically, this is part 2 to the Bangalore Detectives Club mystery. This is a historical fiction mystery series with an unsuspecting female sleuth. So this takes place in 1920s India in Bangalore, and it follows a newly married 19-20-year-old woman called Kaveri, who is a homemaker, but she also has an interest in solving mysteries around her. So I really like this series. It's so quick. It's under 300 pages, both of the books, and it's very heartwarming. If you're looking for a cozy mystery, check out the series. The first one, I will say, was more of a cozy mystery than the second one. The second one felt slightly darker, but it depends on your threshold for cozy. So check this out. This is really great. And this author is a professor of sustainability, so I thought that was very cool. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was certainly a step up from the first one. The writing definitely just felt more richer and more confident, and the story was definitely more detailed. I really liked that. After that, I reread Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. This is a book that I have read and loved before, but I was going to be traveling to Rome this month, so I decided to reread it, and so I could show up and do a bit of a Path of Illumination tour for myself. Very geeky, I know. But, you know, as always, the Robert Langdon series are just amazing. Like, they're incredible. Like, my paperback is like so beat up. It's upstairs. I don't even want to bring it down because it's very gross to look at. So I'll just insert a photo of it here. But I reread this after a long time. I read Angels and Demons, I believe, when I was a teenager. So it's been like a long time since then. And I forgot how much I love this. I had a lot of fun just going back to the mystery and, you know, the anticipation of it. The writing, it definitely felt a little bit too detailed. I don't remember it being so detailed. And I had the audiobook that I was listening to at the same time as well. Definitely like an easy 5 stars. Just incredible. I am going to be rereading the Da Vinci Code sometime soon, hopefully, perhaps when I'm in the mood for more like detailed intellectual mystery. So I'll keep you posted on that. After that, even though I was on vacation, I found myself reading before bed, and I read Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. I've had this book on my Kobo for years. I just never got around to reading it. And because I was in the mood for a thriller, I decided to pick it up. Alice Feeney does really good twists and turns, and this is one of her original books, so I know she's recently gained a lot of popularity on TikTok and Bookstagram and BookTube and all of that. But this is one of her original books, and I've been, you know, reading her books for a long time. So I decided to pick this one up. This is about a woman who is in a coma. So she has consciousness, but she obviously can't move or she can't communicate. So she's in a coma in a hospital, but she's aware of what's going on around her. And she's now trying to piece together how she came to be in the coma in the hospital bed. And apparently sometimes she lies. So it was really good. I really enjoyed it. Some really nice twists and turns. Classic Alice Feeney. took something that could potentially have been like very predictable, and she turned it into something that was quite surprising. I gave it a 4 stars. I don't usually rate thrillers that high, only because I find that they're all just the same now, more or less. You know, like your unlikely female narrator who's either, you know, has substance abuse issues or she's mentally unwell. And there was certainly like an element of the unreliable female narrator here, but again, it was very unique. It was not like the usual. After that, I read The House in the Pines by Anna Reyes. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. This book received so much hate on Goodreads. People gave it like 1 star. I thought that was brutal. I have no idea why. I still had it on my Kobo and I decided to read it, and I'm really glad I did. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was actually pretty good mystery. This basically follows this woman who has witnessed her friend die a long time ago when she was a teenager, and now I believe she's in like her late 20s or early 30s, and she decides to come back to her hometown because she sees another woman on YouTube, you know, die the same way that her friend did. And she sees some similarities, so she decides to come back to her hometown to solve it. I had no idea what I was going into, so I was pleasantly surprised by the references to Guatemala and the Guatemala culture and folklore that was woven into this. And that was really relevant to the story because the main female character, her father was from Guatemala, and so it's part of her heritage, and it's really nicely woven in. It, like all good thrillers, you know, this one does time travel a bit, so you've got a past narrative, you've got a present narrative, and you have, again, a bit of an unreliable female narrator, but it was nice. It was nice to see sort of like an inclusion of a different culture in a genre that is not usually inclusive, right, of different cultures. Usually we just have like literary fiction or romances that have other cultural references, but this one was great. I really enjoyed it. This was a great BIPOC inclusion, and I really liked that, and I felt like I learned a lot about folklore from Guatemala. Like I know nothing about, well, I don't know too much about that part of the world, and that's certainly a blind spot that I have, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised when that was included in here. Do not look at the Goodreads reviews. They are brutal. This was a Reese Witherspoon pick, and people were just so brutal in the comments, but I thought it was good. I gave it a 3.5 stars, and it's very hard for me to enjoy a thriller. It has to be quite surprising for me because I feel like they're all the same, like I said. So this one was quite surprising. I would give it a shot again if I were you. I would give it a shot if you're in the market for a new thriller. It definitely was slightly slower paced, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing for me. Oh, after that, I read A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, and this is one that folks had been like telling me about for some time, and I've seen it all over BookTube, but like it is with a few things, or the name rarely ever lives up to the hype, but I still decide to give it a shot. This is basically about a young woman who's a therapist, and one summer these girls start disappearing in her town. Turns out something similar has happened before because this therapist is a daughter of a serial killer who, whatever X amount of years ago, was kidnapping women, kidnapping girls and murdering girls. And so now that this has started happening again, obviously she feels like she has a lot of curiosity around that. She has a lot of unresolved trauma around that. Her father is in jail, so she has no idea who's doing this now. So she takes it upon herself to solve it. I really like the premise. I really like the narration. The story was predictable for me, I will be honest. I saw the end coming a little bit, but I really enjoyed the journey up until the end. I thought Stacey Willingham is a great storyteller. Her characters are, while slightly predictable, they're still very well fleshed out, and that's a strength in a thriller or a murder mystery because often the characters are too one-dimensional. There's not much depth to them. So I enjoyed these characters. Again, this was a month of some really great mysteries. After that, I read Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I was at the bookstore and I wanted to pick up another Alice Feeney after I read Sometimes I Lie. It was between this and Rock, Paper, Scissors. But I had heard so much about this one too, so I picked it up. I read it pretty quickly in a couple days, and this was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was definitely darker than, or had some darker themes than some of other Alice Feeney's books, but that made for a nice change. This had very much Agatha Christie vibes because it's basically about a girl named Daisy Darker. Her family's having a bit of a family reunion on this random isolated house on the island off the coast of England where her grandma lives. It's her grandma's, I think, 80th birthday, and all the family members get together, and then when the clock strikes midnight, they start dropping dead one by one. So isolated house, people dying at every hour, feels a little bit like Agatha Christie, And Then There Were None, that book in particular, but not in a bad way. It was reminiscent of that book, but in a way that felt very comforting, if you get that sense. So I really enjoyed it. I saw the end coming with this one as well. I knew what was going to happen. I pieced it about halfway or 60% through. But again, just because it was predictable, it doesn't ruin the book for me. I actually really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the characters. And I thought it was fun. I thought it was a great spooky read. Definitely spooked me out a little bit more because obviously it happens during like one night. And there's some time traveling too. You get some snippets of the past. But it was definitely like a lot spookier than some of her other books. After that, I read The Perplexing Theft of the Jewel in the Crown by Vaseem Khan. This is part 2 to the Baby Ganesh Detective Agency. I've talked a lot about part 1 of this, so check out my last wrap-up if you haven't heard me talk about this book. But this is a really lovely cozy mystery that is set in Mumbai, India, present time. And it follows a retired detective or a retired inspector who is now a private detective, and he solves crimes around the city, and he has a baby elephant to help him solve those crimes. I definitely like part 2 a lot more than part 1. So the second book is basically about how the royal jewels from England come to India for an exhibition, and then they end up getting robbed. So it centers around like the Kohinoor, if you're aware of like the history and the culture around Kohinoor diamond. But basically the Kohinoor diamond gets stolen, and Inspector Chopra finds himself solving the mystery around what happened to it. So it was quite like, I guess, culturally and politically relevant in that sense. So that was fun. I enjoyed it. And I really do like the characters. We definitely got to see a lot more of some of the characters from the first book. Like Poppy, his wife, definitely had a bigger role. I really enjoyed that. And this felt cozier than the first one. Probably because it didn't involve like a murder or something like the first one did. This one involved a theft. So it was more cozier for me. It wasn't so dark, not so many mature themes. So again, if you're looking for a cozy mystery, definitely check out this series and the Bangalore Detectives Club that I was talking about earlier. These are ones that nobody talks about, but they're really quite great. I gave this one a 4 stars. The next book I read can be called a mix of a romance and a cozy mystery. It's like action-packed book, but this is To Haven to Heist by Sarah Desai. This was my first Sarah Desai. I haven't read any books by her, but she's a Canadian, Indo-Canadian author, and I really enjoyed this. This is basically about our main protagonist, Simi, whose best friend gets blamed for a crime that she didn't do. So she gets blamed for stealing a really, really expensive necklace. And so Simi takes it upon herself to, save her friend's name. And she meets her love interest in this process, and they go about solving this mystery. So it's very action-packed, a lot of fun characters. Like, I actually really enjoyed the cast of characters in here. So they're planning a heist, basically. They're planning on crashing a big, luxurious wedding, and they're planning to do a heist. And so the planning of the heist was hilarious. The process was great. The characters were so lovable. I certainly had an issue in terms of their romantic dynamic. Again, I did a reading vlog of this one. I will link it up here and down below so you can check out my full thoughts on this. Their dynamic was a little bit problematic in my opinion, but I'm happy to look past that. I gave it 4 stars because it was fun, it was fast paced, and like any cozy mystery, it is very outlandish. So there's a whole bunch of unrealistic things that happen, but I think that's part of the charm that made this so fun. If you're looking for a cozy mystery that doesn't involve like a serious crime, check this one out. This definitely more, I guess, like, this is more cozy friendly. And I would recommend this to someone who was looking to start out in the genre of cozy mystery, because it has some really great like comedic elements as well as mystery elements. All right, after having the heist, I needed something more fantasy related, and I decided to pick up The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now, this is a book that I've seen going around everywhere on booktube, and I had been looking forward to reading it for quite some time. So I was saving it for when I was in the mood for a fantasy, and I decided to read this, and I'm so disappointed to report that I DNF'd it at 35%. Sadly, I just did not feel interested in this book. I'm still gonna give it another shot later on. Again, just because I DNF'd it doesn't mean that it's a bad book, just it didn't do much for me. My standard for fantasy is now ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and because that one really like does the romance, fantasy, the intrigue, the mystique so well, and that felt lacking in this. The characters felt very one-dimensional. There really wasn't that much world building going on here. It's like in my experience, I just found myself thrown into the story without any explanation for what was going on or what like the words meant, and I don't know. But it just didn't feel like it was for me, so I decided to DNF it. But like I said, I will come back to it another time, hopefully. After that, I read a book that I had been putting off for so long, and I shouldn't have been, and that was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I have read another Matt Haig before, so I bought this a few months ago, no qualms, no second guesses, and I decided to read it. I did a reading vlog with this, so that will also be linked below, but I flew through this book in 24 hours. I flew through this book in 15 hours, including the 7 hours that I slept, so it was such a quick read. It was a great read. Some chapters are very short, like they're just a poem or a verse, so they're easy to kind of go through. And this story is just so, gosh, there's so much depth to it. It's so meaningful. It's so interesting. It's so intriguing that I did not want to put this book down. So I had a great time reading this book. I highly recommend it to everybody. I gave it 5 stars. And if you've been here for some time, you know how rare 5 stars is for me. Not because other books aren't worthy of it, but it's just for me, a 5-star book has to be a book that really left me feeling really like deeply touched or really deeply impacted in a good way. And this really was it. But if you have not heard of Midnight Library, it's basically about how there exists a library between life and death. And there's many books on that library, and you can pick a book, and whichever book you pick is going to take you to another version of your life. So it's essentially about this main character going through those books, trying to see, can she, if she would have done things differently, how would her life have turned out? And would she go back, and would she sort of, like undo her regrets and things like that? Definitely, obviously, a sci-fi element to it. There's an element here of parallel lives and fifth dimension and whatnot, but it's not a sci-fi book. It is a literary fiction with splashes of sci-fi topics, but it's not a sci-fi book. So if any of those concepts feel intimidating to you, please know that this is not like, the author doesn't go into like huge description about what is parallel universes and things like that. That's not the point of the book. The point of the book is everything else. So certainly check it out. If there's one book that you would read from this entire video I would make it this one because I thought it was great. Definitely trigger warnings, so please be cognizant. This book heavily talks about suicide. It isn't like a 13 Reasons Why type of a book, so it's not descriptive, but it is a topic that's mentioned over and over and over again. So if this is a topic that is triggering for you, please practice care and just be mindful of that. But this was great and very much worth the hype. After that, I read Sentence in Second Degree Murder by Tirza Price. This is the Jane Austen murder mystery series that's young adult, but it's great. I love it. And this is the second one in the series. The first one was Pride and Premeditation. I read that a few months ago. And the next one after this is Manslaughter Park, obviously from Mansfield Park. And that's going to be a book that I'm reading in November, hopefully. So you'll see it soon. But if you're a lover of classics and you also enjoy retellings and you like mysteries, you would really like this series. It's so fast-paced, it's so fun. It has all the main characters from the original Jane Austens, and it really kind of injects this like new life into these old stories of the classics that we know and love. And I particularly, again, love books that have unassuming female sleuths, and that's what we get here as well with Marianne and Eleanor. Yeah, with Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood. And yeah, I don't know. There's not much else to say. I really enjoyed it. I think this series is great. I don't know why more people are not talking about them. These are like my like guilty pleasure. Like if I don't know what I want to read, but I want to read something that's going to be intriguing and is going to keep my interest without necessarily being so heavy, then this series. I gave this 4 stars, which was higher than my rating for Pride and Premeditation, because I really enjoyed the sister dynamic in here between Eleanor and Marianne. And just, again, sometimes, sequels can not live up to the hype in a series, but sometimes sequels are great because it's an opportunity for the author to do something differently and refine their work and write better. And I think that's certainly been the case with this one. Hopefully, let's see, it lives up to the third one. The second last book that I read for this month was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I read the Greek one by him. The other one, The Maidens, I believe it's called, and I enjoyed it. On my shelf forever. I don't know why I didn't get to it in time. I gave this 3.75 stars. This is very highly rated. It was a good book. It was great. The thing that I really like about this author is that it's so fast-paced. Like at no point are things like sluggish or lagging. It is really, really lovely, fast-paced mystery. I like the fact that this wasn't so dark. I was initially a little bit uneasy going into the book because I was anticipating it to be very, very dark, but it wasn't as dark as I thought it was going to be. So that was a nice, pleasant surprise because I don't think I had the stomach for something super dark right now, and I enjoyed this. Was it predictable? Not really. I don't think I can say that, oh, I knew what was going to happen at the end, but like it didn't pull the rug out from underneath me, like sometimes with Alice Sweeney books, like when I read like a twist, I'm just, shook. This didn't do that for me, but again, I enjoyed the storytelling. I really enjoy his Greek mythology references. I love that. I'm a big Greek mythology nerd, and anytime a book incorporates that any which way, I really enjoyed that. That was the third last book. The second last book I read was The Last Word by Taylor Adams, and my gosh, I had never heard of this author before. I just saw this book because it was on Book of the Month and a lot of people were reading it, and I decided to read it, and I am so thankful that I did because this book was phenomenal. I gave it 5 stars. This was more horror, so I would say it's more like a fast-paced horror book than a mystery or a thriller. There's nothing like paranormal. It's not like paranormal horror, but it was very scary. I was very scared, and I left a Goodreads comment. If you don't follow me on Goodreads, you should. I have it linked down below. But I left a comment on Goodreads saying that this book gave me whiplash, and that was very, very true. I got this, you thought the book was done, but then it wasn't done. And then now you thought it was done and it wasn't done. And there's just like a twist after twist after twist after twist. And I really enjoy that. And that's what gave me whiplash. It was very scary though, but I'm also a person who scares quite easily. So I don't know if that's like, if you should take my word for it, but it was very spooky. It was very scary. And this is like a nice slasher movie, but in a book. But if you haven't heard what this book is about, it's basically about this young woman, Emma Carpenter, who's house sitting in like a lonely cabin, and she is binging books just to kind of make time go by. She comes across this like really, really bad like murder mystery, and she decides to leave it a 1-star review, and like a horrible review. And then the author comes after her. So that's all I'm going to say about it, because that's all I knew going into it. And I was very pleasantly surprised. So check it out. I know it's like now after Halloween, but this was such a nice spooky vibes book. And I have been reading 2 other BIPOC books this month that I haven't finished, but you'll hear more about them. I've been reading A Brotherless Night by Vivi Ganeshananthan. You've heard me talk about that a little bit before in my reading blog, but I'll talk more about it next month. And a book that I'm going to be done with today, so I'm including it in here, is A Woman is No Man by Itaf Rum. I am sure I pronounced that name wrong, so I'm really sorry. Please correct me in the comments. But this book is so remarkable. It is a heavier book, so I have taken my time with it, and in between I have used other books as fillers, but this basically follows story of 2 Palestinian American women. You have got Isra and her daughter Dea, and so there's a bit of like a time difference as well, 2 different timelines that we jump from, the 90s and then the 2000s. And it basically follows Isra being like a young Palestinian girl living in a camp, and what it's like for her to come to America and get married. And then it follows her daughter Dea as she navigates some of those similar challenges like her mother does. I feel like I know a little bit more about the Arab world, and I mean, I don't mean to say that this book is representative of the whole culture, absolutely not, but I certainly learned a lot more than I did. And this book is so powerful. I don't know what I'm going to rate it as exactly. It's likely going to be around 4 stars because it is so fast paced. It obviously has like a lot of mature themes. So just be cognizant of those, look those up before going into it. But it's a painful but also very beautiful story of 2 women trying to navigate cultural expectations and cultural norms, gender norms, identity, cultural identity, all in this like new context of American culture. And I think this is a very, very powerful book. I would recommend it to everyone who has the capacity for something heavy like this, especially right now. But I can't wait to finish it. Today's going to be the day I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to buy a physical copy of this book. And I'm also going to pick up this author's next book. I believe it's called Evil Eye. And I think it also revolves around Palestinian American characters, if I'm not wrong. But this book is set in like Brooklyn. I believe the author is from Brooklyn herself. And it is like, it's not really a historical fiction because it's 90s and 2000s. So I wouldn't place it in like that category. This does feel like a present book to me, but it does have references to the past. The mom and the daughter are the 2 main voices. We certainly do see a bit of like perspective from some of the other women in the family, but not as much. But yeah, I'm not being very coherent, but I just know I really, really like this book. I think it's so well done. It's so powerful. It's absolutely gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, but it's so powerful. I'll leave a bit of a longer review, I guess, on Goodreads if you want to check it out there. But that was the last book for this month. So hopefully you enjoyed this little reading review. If there's any books from here that interest you, particularly any of like the BIPOC stories, let me know which one you end up picking up. I have to say this was a really nice reading month. I got through so much and I'm so happy because it's not always, you know, that you enjoy almost every single book that you read. I know I did have one DNF, but that happens. Thanks for joining me today. If you want to watch more, check out those 2 reading vlogs next, where I go into more detail with some of the books here. And I'll see you in my next video.